Hello everyone, Dehya is finally out and I'm sure many of you just like me find it difficult to actually find a team that fits her. Regardless of how you build her, because of her kit and sort of tank support role, it's pretty difficult to actually find out what team to even play her in. Especially as a DPS, with the problems of her kit and low damage, you'll need to find a team that solves these problems while improving her. And after testing her out as well as looking at the teams the Genshin community has come up with, I found teams that do just that and effectively so. But before I get into these teams, I just want to mention that for every team I mention, you'll want to run Favoni's weapons since Dehya struggles to regain her burst back reliably. You'll want to run one, maybe even two Favoni's weapons. And for those wondering, this is my Dehya build. I'll also be speaking of the builds of Dehya's party members should they be different from their normal builds. Anyhow, let's now begin with a simple but effective team, Monopyro. This team overall is one of my favorite teams to run Dehya in just because this team is strong and complements Dehya very well. So much so that Dehya actually feels really good to play in this team. There will be a lot of pyro particles produced by this team, so Dehya is able to get her burst back very reliably. And as for damage, the team deals good damage, although the damage may not be as high as say some of the teams I'll be mentioning since there's no reactions in this team, but the team still deals good damage nonetheless. The rotation of this team is to first start by using Benny's burst and skill. Then use Kazuha's skill and burst. After this, Xiangling's skill and burst, and then finally use Dehya's burst. After her burst is finished, use Dehya's skills for some passive damage while you regain everyone's energy, and then repeat. For the builds of this team, on top of their usual artifacts, Dehya or Xiangling can use 4 Lava Walker or 2 Crimson Witch and any 2 plus 18% attack, but aside from this, everyone is in their normal builds. Let's now get into some reaction teams to better Dehya's damage, beginning with Vaporized Dehya. For Vaporized Dehya, it's key that you play a Hydro character that's able to automatically apply Hydro on their own regardless of what you do. For example, units like Kokumi, who kills 2 birds with 1 stone by healing and applying Hydro, Mona, whose burst works really well with Dehya's burst, and Ayato, who I'll be using in this showcase. The reason being is that for some reason, Hoyoverse thought it made sense to label Dehya's fire punches in her burst as burst attacks, not as normal attacks. So the pillars of Hydro sub DPS's, Xingqiu and Yalan cannot be used with Dehya as their bursts only activate their normal attacks, even though Dehya is literally swinging her arms, punching like a normal attack. It's dumb. It's another hassle we gotta work through, but just another way for Hoyoverse to show that they hate Dehya. But anyways, to play this team, begin with Ayato's burst, followed by Kazuha's burst to swirl Hydro. If there are multiple enemies, you don't want to use Kazuha's burst here, since there will be so much Hydro produced that you won't be able to swirl Pyro to buff Dehya, which to do so, use Benny's burst and skill, and then both of Dehya's skill. Once the enemy is affected with Pyro, which you can confirm by looking at the enemy's health bar, perform Kazuha's skill, and then finish off the rotation with Dehya's burst. Moving on to builds, the only build to note is Ayato's build, since instead of usually being a main DPS, he's now a sub DPS. Thus his artifact should either be 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, or 2 Heart of Depth and 2 Noblesse. Ayato does also struggle with energy, so build high ER on him around 210%. You may have to give him an energy recharge sands, or you can give him an attack sands and instead give him a weapon with an ER substat, the best being the Favonius sword to battery himself as well as Dehya. Now let's talk about a team that is one of Dehya's strongest teams right now, that being Melt. Melt overall is a really strong reaction, yet most will instead play Vaporize when playing on Pyro DPS for Vaporize's reliability and comfy playstyle. This was in large part due to Xingqiu and Yalan, but since Dehya can't be played with them, Melt rises as a better reaction for Dehya. And with this certain comp, melting is very easy to perform, there are no special timings, and you can easily deal tons of damage with Dehya. I was surprised by the results of this team and I highly recommend to play this team if you decide to play Dehya as a DPS. The comp's rotation is Benny's burst and skill, then use Sucrose's skill to swirl Pyro. Now use Rosaria's skill and burst, and quickly use Sucrose's burst to have her burst absorb Cryo. Now activate Dehya's burst to finish the rotation. A big part of why this team works so well is Sucrose's ability to grant high EM to her party members, and because of her burst's ability to swirl Cryo despite being on Bennett's burst, I highly recommend to use Sucrose on this team. But other animal units can be played, albeit with a slightly different rotation. For her build, Sucrose is in her usual build of 4 Viridescent. For her weapons, you can choose from either the Sacrificial Fragments to increase the amount of EM that will be passed on to Dehya and to get Sucrose's burst back through the weapon's passive, or you can use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer to greatly buff Dehya's damage. Now let's include Dehya into the meta by getting into some Dendro teams she can be played in. The first team is Burgeon Dehya. Burgeon overall is a pretty slept on reaction, though it may not be as good as say Hyper Bloom. Burgeon is by no means weak. The great part of Burgeon is that pretty much any pyro character with the right build and artifacts can deal high consistent damage through Burgeon, including Dehya. In this team, Dehya isn't the main DPS, nor does she see a lot of field time. She is only used for her skill, though this is definitely not the most fun way to play her. I feel this is an important team to know, since if you decide to play Dehya, you have meta team options in which she can be played in, not just teams in which she's the main DPS and the entire team is built around her being a DPS. This team is very strong thanks to Nahida's high Dendro application, the high passive damage through Yelan and Xingqiu, and the burgeon damage from Yelan. This team overall works really well aside from the uptime problem of Dehya's skill, where for around 8 seconds her skill will be inactive. There is a fix for this, however, that being the sacrificial greatsword. This weapon isn't absolutely needed for this team, but the sword's passive will bring the uptime of Dehya's skill to 100% uptime, making her a much better option for burgeon. The rotation of this team is to use Nahida's skill, followed by both Yelan and Xingqiu's skill and burst. Now use Nahida's burst and then Dehya's skill. Now normal attack with Nahida, and after some time when there are Dendro cores, reapply Dehya's skill. Doing this will allow for the greatsword's effect to take place if the initial cast of Dehya's skill doesn't trigger it. By the way, Dehya won't be able to damage very tall enemies like Ruin Graders with Burgeon through the passive damage of her skill, so you're gonna have to use her burst or the cast of her skill to apply Pyro for Burgeon to occur. For this team, Dehya should be built triple EM with the artifact sets of either 4 Lost Paradise, 4 Gilded Dreams, or 2 sets having plus 80 EM. Now for a quick but strong bonus team, which is called Hyper Burgeon. This team is close to the last, however Kuki Shinobu is played, bringing Electro into the team, which causes tons of reactions to occur at the same time. Hyper Bloom will occur, Burgeon will occur, Spread will occur, Burning Overload, you name it, many reactions are occurring all at the same time, making this team quite strong and quite fun. The rotation of this team is essentially the same as the last, but after Nahida's burst and right before Dehya's skill, you use Kuki's skill. I highly recommend to try this team, as it's a great team that's a nice change of pace from the usual meta Dendro teams. And that is all the teams I have for you today. Please let me know what do you think of these teams, as well as what teams are you currently playing Dehya in. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Take care, and thank you for watching once again.